Move aside. The defendant's entrance is around the back. A black woman dressed like that doesn't walk through the judge's door. Officer Derek Collins sneered as he ripped the worn leather briefcase from Vanessa Brooks's hand and slammed it onto the courthouse security table. The latch burst open, legal folders, handwritten notes, and a sealed envelope scattered across the polished marble floor. Several attorneys stopped walking. A few visitors exchanged uneasy smiles. Derek nudged one of the folders with the toe of his boot. "You people always think confidence can replace credentials," he mocked. "You look like someone waiting to be sentenced, not someone fit to stand before a judge." The laughter around them grew louder. He folded his arms and looked Vanessa up and down with open contempt. "You know what the problem is? A black woman borrows a cheap suit, carries an old briefcase, and suddenly expects everyone to believe she's important." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Face it, nobody walks into this courthouse, looks at you, and sees authority. They see someone who belongs on the other side of the courtroom." Vanessa slowly knelt and gathered her papers without answering. "I only need to reach the judicial floor." Derek stepped in front of her again, blocking the hallway with his body. "The only floor you're reaching today is a holding cell. Take one more step, and I'll have you in handcuffs before lunch." The bustling courthouse lobby fell completely silent. Vanessa calmly lifted her eyes. She didn't argue. She didn't reveal who she was. At that exact moment, the private judicial elevator chimed. Its door slid open. 12 black-robed judges stepped into the lobby. The instant they saw Vanessa Brooks, every one of them changed direction and walked straight toward the woman Officer Derek Collins had just publicly humiliated. Before this story unfolds, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. Stay with us until the very end, because the next few minutes will prove that the greatest mistake isn't judging a person's appearance, it's underestimating their character. If stories of justice, dignity, and unforgettable reversals inspire you, subscribe and join us for more. Nearly 2 hours earlier, the morning had begun with quiet optimism. Judge Vanessa Brooks stepped out of a taxi on Constitution Avenue, just as the first rays of sunlight reflected from the glass facade of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. She paused for a brief moment, looking up at the familiar building that had shaped some of the most important decisions of her career. She had presided over federal cases for nearly 15 years, yet she still believed every courthouse deserved the same respect as the first one she had entered as a young law clerk. Her appearance that morning, however, was far from what most people expected. The airline had lost her luggage during a late-night flight from Chicago. Inside the missing suitcase was the Navy suit she had planned to wear during the National Judicial Ethics Conference. Instead, she had changed into the only spare clothes available in her carry-on, a simple gray business suit she usually reserved for long flights. The sleeves had begun to fade. The leather handle on her old briefcase showed years of use. Comfortable black shoes replaced the polished heels she normally wore to formal judicial events. She smiled quietly. None of that mattered. Justice had never depended on expensive clothing. Before leaving the sidewalk, she received a phone call. "Good morning, Judge Brooks," said Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes. "Everyone is excited to welcome you. The Chief Justice's delegation should arrive in about 30 minutes. "I'll be there shortly," Vanessa replied. "Please don't announce my arrival." Eleanor laughed softly. "You still enjoy surprising people." "I enjoy seeing how people treat strangers," Vanessa answered. It was not the first time she had entered a courthouse without announcing her title. Throughout her career, she had quietly visited district courthouses around the country, observing how security officers, clerks, and attorneys treated ordinary citizens. She believed respect meant little if it was offered only to people with prestigious titles. Ending the call, she slipped her phone into her pocket and walked toward the courthouse entrance. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Lawyers hurried between security checkpoints carrying trial binders. Federal marshals exchanged greetings. Court reporters balanced coffee cups while reviewing schedules. Television crews prepared for several high-profile hearings. Everything appeared organized, until Officer Derek Collins noticed her. He stood beside the primary security checkpoint with the confidence of someone convinced he could judge a person before hearing a single word. His reputation among newer officers was impressive. He remembered faces. He spotted suspicious behavior quickly. He rarely smiled. As Vanessa joined the line, Derek's attention settled on her worn briefcase. His eyes traveled to her faded sleeves, then to her shoes. Finally, he looked directly into her face. Instead of offering the routine greeting given to every visitor, he frowned. "Ma'am," he called sharply. Vanessa stepped forward. "Good morning. Where are you going?" "The judicial conference." His eyebrows lifted. The conference? Yes. Who invited you? The administrative office. Derek folded his arms. Do you have an invitation? I have everything I need. Her answer sounded calm. To Derek, it sounded evasive. Several attorneys behind Vanessa exchanged curious glances. One whispered, "Probably another confused visitor." Derek pointed toward a separate inspection table. "Step over there." Vanessa complied without complaint. He opened the briefcase and began removing folders one by one. Each document had been carefully arranged the night before. Within seconds, neat stacks became untidy piles. "Please handle those carefully," Vanessa said. "They're important. So is courthouse security." He flipped through the first folder without reading more than the headings. Legal memoranda, conference notes, ethics reports. Nothing looked suspicious. Still, Derek continued searching. "What exactly do you do?" he asked. "I'm here to participate in today's proceedings." "As what?" Vanessa smiled politely. "You'll know soon enough." That answer irritated him. "I asked a simple question, and I gave you an honest one." People nearby began watching more openly. The delay had started attracting attention. A young associate attorney checked his watch. An elderly couple waiting for a civil hearing looked uncomfortable. A television cameraman glanced toward the growing crowd before returning to his equipment. Derek placed both hands on the inspection table. "I've worked security here for 9 years. Vanessa nodded. "That's an important responsibility. I know what judges look like." There was no anger in Vanessa's expression, only quiet curiosity. "Do you?" He gestured toward the elevators reserved for members of the judiciary. "They don't come through here carrying old briefcases and wearing travel clothes." Vanessa answered gently, "Sometimes they do." His expression hardened. "I doubt that." At that moment, another security officer walked past. "You need anything, Derek?" "No." Without taking his eyes off Vanessa, Derek replied, "Just verifying someone's story." The officer shrugged and continued walking. Vanessa noticed several courthouse employees looking away. No one wanted to interfere. She understood why. Authority often discouraged questions. She also knew something else. Character revealed itself most clearly when people believed no one important was watching. A notification vibrated inside her pocket. Another message from Eleanor Hayes. "Conference room ready. Everyone is asking whether you've arrived. Vanessa, read it." She typed a short reply. "I'm here. Please wait a few more minutes." She slipped the phone away before Derek noticed. He closed the briefcase but did not return it. "So," he said, "until I know exactly who you are, you're staying right here." Vanessa looked toward the elevators, then back at Derek. Around them, the courthouse continued moving, unaware that the morning's most important test had already begun, and Officer Derek Collins had no idea he was the one being evaluated. Officer Derek Collins kept one hand firmly on Vanessa Brooks's briefcase. The other rested near his radio. Around them, the courthouse lobby continued moving, but more people had begun slowing their pace. Lawyers whispered to one another. Court staff glanced toward the security checkpoint before pretending not to notice. No one wanted to become involved. Vanessa remained composed. "Officer," she said evenly, "I'd appreciate my briefcase. You'll get it back after I'm satisfied. I've already completed the security screening." "You've completed the metal detector," Derek corrected. "You haven't convinced me you belong here." He flipped open another folder. Inside were neatly tabbed briefing papers for the National Judicial Ethics Conference. Without asking permission, Derek thumbed through page after page. Vanessa's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Those documents contain confidential material." "If they're confidential," Derek replied with a smirk, "they shouldn't be in the hands of someone I can't identify." He lifted the folder high enough for nearby visitors to see. "Anyone recognize this lady?" A few uncomfortable smiles appeared. Nobody answered. One older attorney quietly looked away. Another shook his head, sensing the situation had gone too far. Derek dropped the folder carelessly onto the table. Several pages slid onto the marble floor. Vanessa instinctively bent to retrieve them. Before she could reach the first page, Derek's polished shoe stopped it. "Leave it." His voice echoed across the lobby. "I'll decide when this inspection is finished." For the first time that morning, the lobby became completely silent. Vanessa slowly straightened. She looked at the page trapped beneath his shoe, then back at Derek. "I've treated you respectfully." "So far," Derek answered, "you've treated me with half-truths. I answered every question truthfully." "No." He leaned closer. "You answered like someone trying to sound important." He gestured toward the elevators reserved for judges. "People with authority don't hide who they are." Vanessa held his gaze. "And people entrusted with authority shouldn't assume they already know everything." The words were calm. There was no anger, no challenge, Yet something about her confidence irritated Derek even more. He picked up her identification wallet. Before Vanessa could speak, he opened it. Her driver's license was visible. Nothing more. The judicial identification card remained tucked inside a separate compartment that Derek never bothered to inspect. He snapped the wallet shut. That's it? That's all you've chosen to look at? He frowned. What does that mean? It means appearances often depend on how carefully we're willing to see. Several courthouse employees exchanged uncertain glances. The conversation no longer sounded like an argument. It sounded like a lesson. Derek refused to hear it. His radio crackled. Security. This is conference coordination. Has Judge Brooks checked in? Derek pressed the transmit button without hesitation. Negative. No sign of her. Only Vanessa knew the irony. She was standing less than 3 feet away. A young associate named Michael Lawson, carrying conference materials, stopped at the checkpoint. He glanced at the folder lying open on the inspection table. His eyes caught a printed name, Judge Vanessa Brooks. His expression changed. He looked at Vanessa, then at Derek. Officer, Derek Jutimov. Keep moving. I think there may be... I said keep moving. Michael hesitated. He looked again at Vanessa, who offered the slightest shake of her head. Almost invisible. Almost impossible to notice. He understood. Without another word, he walked away. Derek watched him disappear down the corridor. "C'est?" he said. "Even your little audience knows not to interfere." Vanessa quietly gathered the remaining papers still scattered across the table. She aligned every page with practiced precision. Years in the courtroom had taught her something few people ever mastered. Dignity was easiest to lose when someone else tried hardest to take it away. Across the lobby, Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes stepped out of a side hallway. She had come downstairs after several unanswered phone calls. From a distance, she spotted Vanessa immediately. Relief flashed across her face. She started walking toward the checkpoint. Before she reached them, Vanessa subtly raised one hand beside her briefcase. A tiny gesture. Just enough. Eleanor stopped. She instantly understood. The evaluation was still in progress. Instead of approaching, she quietly turned around and disappeared back into the hallway. Derek never noticed. He was too busy staring at Vanessa. "I've made my decision." Vanessa waited. "Until I receive confirmation from Judicial Administration, you're staying exactly where you are." He picked up his radio once more. "And if anyone objects..." He looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. "I'll call for additional officers." Vanessa didn't answer. She simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. Not because she had lost, but because she knew the truth needed only a few more minutes to arrive. Far above them, the private judicial elevator began its slow descent toward the lobby. Neither Derek nor the growing crowd had any idea who was inside. The courthouse clock struck 9. The sound echoed through the marble lobby, followed almost immediately by another call over the internal communication system. National Judicial Ethics Conference will begin in 20 minutes. Attorneys quickened their pace. Court employees hurried toward the upper floors. Only one corner of the lobby remained frozen in place. Officer Derek Collins still stood between Vanessa Brooks and the elevator reserved for members of the judiciary. He folded his arms as though the matter had already been settled. "I've asked you 3 times who you are." Vanessa met his eyes. "And I've answered every question you've asked." "No." He shook his head. "You've answered like someone trying to avoid giving a straight answer." Without waiting for permission, Derek picked up her briefcase once again. He searched every compartment. Pens. A legal pad. Reading glasses. A weathered notebook filled with handwritten observations. He flipped through its pages. The notes described courthouse entrances, accessibility, staff interactions, and visitor experiences from different federal districts around the country. There were no names, no explanations, only careful observations. "What is this?" Derek asked. "My notes." "For what?" "My work." He laughed. Everyone suddenly becomes mysterious when they're caught. He tossed the notebook back into the briefcase carelessly. It landed upside down. Several loose pages slipped free. Vanessa quietly picked them up. She smoothed each page before placing it back inside. Her patience unsettled several people watching nearby. Most expected anger. Instead, they saw remarkable restraint. A middle-aged court reporter whispered to a colleague, "She's calmer than anyone I've ever seen." Her colleague answered softly. That usually means someone has nothing to prove. Derek overheard neither comment. His attention remained fixed on Vanessa. He motioned toward another officer standing several yards away. "Officer Ramirez." The younger officer approached. "Sir, stay here." Ramirez looked confused. "For what reason?" In case our guest decides she doesn't like my instructions, Ramirez glanced toward Vanessa. She stood with perfect composure, hands folded in front of her. She had not raised her voice once. She had not attempted to leave. She had not argued. She hasn't done anything, Ramirez said quietly. Not yet. Derek's reply carried enough certainty to end the discussion. Ramirez nodded reluctantly and stepped aside. Vanessa noticed the hesitation in the younger officer's face. He looked uncomfortable, not fearful, simply uncertain. It reminded her why leadership mattered. People often followed the loudest voice in the room, even when they quietly questioned it. Another message arrived on Derek's radio. Conference coordination requesting status. Judge Brooks has still not checked in. Derek pressed the transmit button immediately. Negative. We've identified one individual attempting to access restricted judicial areas without sufficient verification. Vanessa listened in silence. No irritation crossed her face. She merely looked toward the elevator bank for a brief moment before returning her attention to Derek. At that exact moment, Michael Lawson returned. The young attorney now carried a thick conference binder. He stopped several feet away. Officer Collins, what now? I reviewed the conference roster. So? I think you should call the administrative office before making any further decisions. Derek smiled coldly. You questioning my judgment? I'm suggesting we verify everything. I already am. Michael hesitated. There may be information you don't have. There usually is. Derek stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. But that's why I'm the one wearing the badge. Michael looked toward Vanessa again. She offered the slightest smile. Not encouragement, not surrender, only reassurance. He understood. If she remained calm, there had to be a reason. He quietly stepped back. I've said what I needed to say. As he disappeared into the crowd, Derek shook his head. People today are too easily fooled. Vanessa answered for the first time in nearly a minute. Or perhaps they're willing to ask questions before reaching conclusions. His jaw tightened. You enjoy speaking in riddles. I enjoy giving people opportunities. Opportunities for what? To choose fairness before certainty. Those words lingered in the air. Even Officer Ramirez looked thoughtful. Several courthouse employees who had quietly gathered nearby exchanged uncertain glances. Something about this woman felt different. She spoke with unusual confidence. She never demanded special treatment. She never threatened to file a complaint. She never even mentioned her profession. Yet she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone entirely unafraid of the outcome. Across the lobby, Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes watched from behind a glass office door. Every instinct told her to intervene. One phone call would end everything. One sentence would reveal Vanessa's identity. Her hand rested on the receiver. Then she remembered Vanessa's message. Please wait a few more minutes. Eleanor slowly lowered her hand. If Vanessa was allowing this to continue, she trusted there was a reason. Back at the checkpoint, Derek took one final step forward. Until judicial administration confirms your identity, you will remain exactly where you are. Vanessa inclined her head. I understand. Her answer surprised him. No argument? I've already learned everything I came here to learn. Derek frowned. What does that mean? Before Vanessa could respond, a soft electronic chime echoed through the lobby. Every head turned instinctively toward the private judicial elevator. The illuminated display above the doors began counting down. 7, 6, 5. The elevator was descending. Neither Derek nor the growing crowd realized that the next few moments would change every assumption they had made that morning. The digital display above the private judicial elevator continued its slow countdown. 4, 3, 2. Then it stopped. The doors remained closed. No one stepped out. Instead, another elevator beside it opened, releasing several federal clerks carrying stacks of conference binders. The tension that had built inside the lobby dissolved into confused murmurs. Derek Collins smirked. You see? He folded his arms. Whoever you're waiting for isn't coming. Vanessa Brooks glanced briefly toward the silent judicial elevator before returning her attention to him. I've learned not to confuse delay with absence. Her answer irritated Derek more than any argument could have. He picked up his radio again. Conference security. This is checkpoint 1. A voice answered immediately. Go ahead. I'm still holding the unidentified female claiming access to the judicial conference. Vanessa quietly corrected him. I've never claimed anything. You implied enough. The dispatcher responded. The conference is scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Chief Clerk Hayes wants every participant upstairs immediately. Derek looked toward Vanessa. Tell her she'll have to wait. Across the lobby, Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes heard those words through her own radio. She closed her eyes for a moment. Every minute of delay pushed the conference further behind schedule. Inside the 8th-floor conference room, 12 seats reserved for senior federal judges remained empty. The largest chair at the center of the room was still unoccupied. Several distinguished judges exchanged puzzled looks. Judge Harold Emerson checked his watch. This isn't like Vanessa. Judge Linda Alvarez nodded. She has never been late. Another judge asked quietly, "Has anyone reached her?" Eleanor answered with practiced calm, "She has arrived." The room fell silent. "Then where is she?" Eleanor hesitated. "She's..." completing an unexpected observation. None of them fully understood, except one. Chief Judge Robert Whitmore smiled faintly. "I think I know exactly what she's doing." Back downstairs, the courthouse lobby had grown noticeably busier. News crews moved equipment through the entrance. Civil litigants lined up for security screening. Every few minutes, another curious glance drifted toward Vanessa. People had begun whispering. "Who is she? Did she fake credentials? Why is security still holding her?" Rumors spread much faster than fact. Officer Ramirez stood beside Derek, increasingly uncomfortable. Quietly, he leaned closer. "Sir." "What?" "Maybe we should call judicial administration directly." "I already told you." "I know." Ramirez lowered his voice. "But she's remained calm for almost an hour." "So, most people being questioned would be angry." Derek shrugged. "Some people rehearse confidence." Vanessa heard every word. She offered neither agreement nor disagreement. Instead, she watched families entering the courthouse. An elderly veteran removed his hat before passing through security. A young mother struggled to fold a stroller while holding her son's hand. Each visitor received a smile from Officer Ramirez. Each received only brief instructions. Vanessa noticed the difference immediately. Ramirez treated everyone with patience. Derek treated everyone according to his first impression. The distinction mattered. It always had. Her phone vibrated once more. A secure message appeared. "Evaluation window extended. Continue as necessary." No signature. None was needed. She locked the screen without replying. Derek noticed the movement. "Who keeps texting you?" "A colleague." "About today's hearing? About today's responsibilities?" He extended his hand. "I'll need your phone." Vanessa looked at him steadily. "My phone contains privileged judicial communications." His eyebrows rose. "There you go again." "What?" Using impressive words to sound important. Without waiting for permission, he reached toward the phone. Vanessa calmly took one step backward. "I won't interfere with your security procedures." She slipped the phone into her pocket. "But I will protect confidential communications." For a brief second, frustration flashed across Derek's face. He had expected fear. He had expected excuses. Instead, every answer came with quiet certainty. That certainty unsettled him. Across the lobby, Michael Lawson returned for a third time. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Senior Court Administrator Denise Carter. She surveyed the scene carefully before approaching. "Officer Collins." "Good morning, Miss Carter. I understand there's been a delay." "Routine verification." Denise glanced toward Vanessa. Their eyes met for only a moment. Vanessa offered the slightest nod. Almost invisible, Denise understood immediately. She turned back to Derek. "Has the visitor become disruptive?" "No." "Threatened anyone?" "No." "Refused screening?" "No." "Attempted to flee?" "No." Denise remained silent for several seconds, then continued following procedure. Derek smiled confidently. "I intend to." She walked away without another question. Michael stared after her in disbelief. "You knew something," he whispered once they were out of earshot. Denise answered quietly, "I know enough to let this play out." Back at the checkpoint, Derek interpreted her departure as approval. His confidence grew. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to those waiting nearby, "security isn't about appearances. It's about protecting this building." Vanessa looked at him with calm compassion. "No," she said softly. "It's about protecting the people inside it." The words lingered long after she finished speaking. Even Ramirez lowered his eyes. At that exact moment, the indicator above the private judicial elevator lit up again. This time it descended without stopping. 8, 7, 6, 5. Every number echoed through the suddenly silent lobby. Something was different. Everyone could feel it, including Derek Collins. For the first time that morning, certainty gave way to an unfamiliar feeling. Doubt. The illuminated numbers above the private judicial elevator continued their slow descent. 4, 3. Then, they stopped again. The doors remained firmly shut. An uneasy silence settled over the lobby. Officer Derek Collins let out a short laugh. "I guess your important friends are having trouble finding you." Vanessa Brooks offered only a faint smile. People who understand responsibility rarely rush. Her calm answer only deepened Derek's frustration. He checked his watch. The National Judicial Ethics Conference should have started nearly 10 minutes earlier. Instead, conference coordinators were pacing the 8th floor while senior judges remained inside the meeting room. He still believed the delay had nothing to do with the woman standing before him. His radio crackled once more. Checkpoint 1. Derek immediately answered. This is Collins. Chief Clerk Hayes requests confirmation. Has Judge Vanessa Brooks arrived? Derek glanced sideways at Vanessa before replying with complete confidence. Negative. She has not entered the building. Vanessa lowered her eyes for a brief moment. Not because she felt insulted, because she had just heard the final answer she needed. She quietly memorized the exact wording. She has not entered the building. A statement made without verification. A conclusion based entirely on appearance. Nearby, Officer Ramirez shifted uneasily. Sir, what? Should we maybe ask her name one more time? Derek frowned. I already did. No. Ramirez looked toward Vanessa. I mean, her full name. For the first time all morning, Derek hesitated. He realized something. Throughout the entire encounter, he had never actually requested her complete identification in the standard sequence required by courthouse policy. Instead, he had relied almost entirely on assumptions. Still unwilling to admit the possibility of error, he crossed his arm. Fine. He faced Vanessa again. Your full name? Vanessa Brooks. He waited. Nothing about the name sounded familiar. He scribbled it onto a notepad. Middle name? Elaine. He wrote again. Then he reached for the courthouse visitor database. A few seconds later, the search returned multiple entries. Visitors, attorneys, employees. None immediately matched. He leaned back with visible satisfaction. I don't see anything. Vanessa remained composed. Perhaps you're searching the wrong system. What does that mean? There are more than one. Derek Schmierked. Now you're telling me how courthouse records work? I'm simply suggesting that not every person entering this building belongs in the visitor database. Officer Ramirez looked at the screen. His eyes narrowed. She had a point. Judges, federal administrators, conference officials. They use different credential systems. Before he could speak, Derek closed the search window. I've seen enough. Across the lobby, Michael Lawson watched everything unfold from outside the conference registration desk. He could no longer ignore what was happening. Walking quickly to Eleanor Hayes, he lowered his voice. Why don't we stop this? Eleanor looked through the glass toward Vanessa, because Judge Brooks asked us not to. Michael stared in disbelief. She asked for this? No. Eleanor corrected gently. She asked us to wait. Michael looked back toward the checkpoint. She's being humiliated. I know. Then why? Eleanor's expression softened. Because she once told me something I'll never forget. Michael remained silent. The true character of an institution, Eleanor quoted quietly, is revealed by how it treats the person everyone believes has no power. The words settled heavily between them. Back at the checkpoint, Derek continued questioning Vanessa. So what exactly do you do for a living? I serve the public. As what? My work requires me to listen before judging. He rolled his eyes. That could mean anything. It often does. Several people nearby exchanged curious glances. The conversation no longer sounded like security questioning. It sounded like two people speaking entirely different languages. One spoke from certainty, the other from principle. Derek suddenly noticed the worn notebook still inside Vanessa's briefcase. He picked it up again. What are these observations? He flipped through another page. Security officer greeted elderly veteran before checking credentials. Another page. Clerk apologized to confused visitor before redirecting him. Another. Respect shown before authority requested. His brow furrowed. Every page described behavior, not legal arguments, not case notes. Behavior. You've been writing about courthouses. Yes. For how long? A long time. Why? Because procedures tell us how an institution works. She paused, but people reveal what it truly believes. Those words lingered in the air. Even Officer Ramirez found himself thinking about every interaction he'd had that morning. An elderly couple, a frightened witness, a nervous teenager appearing for jury duty. Had he treated them with enough patience? Across the lobby, Senior Administrator Denise Carter quietly stepped beside Eleanor. The evaluation is nearly complete. Eleanor nodded. He still doesn't realize. No. Denise glanced toward Derek. He believes he's investigating her. A faint smile appeared. When, in reality, Eleanor finished the sentence. She has been evaluating him since the moment she walked through the door. At the checkpoint, Derek reached for his radio again. This is Collins. Before he could press the transmit button, a soft electronic tone echoed through the lobby. The private judicial elevator had begun moving once more. This time, it did not stop. The display counted steadily downward. 3, 2, 1. Every conversation in the lobby faded into silence. Every eye turned toward the polished brass doors. Vanessa calmly picked up her briefcase. For the first time that morning, she held it in both hands and quietly waited. The brass doors of the private judicial elevator remained closed. The lobby had become so quiet that the faint hum of the ventilation system could be heard above the distant footsteps echoing through the courthouse. Officer Derek Collins drew a slow breath. He had spent nearly an hour challenging the woman standing before him. Backing down now would mean admitting he might have been wrong. His pride refused to allow it. He looked directly at Vanessa Brooks. "I've been patient," Vanessa answered softly. "So have I." He ignored the remark. "I'm giving you one last opportunity." She waited. "If you're really supposed to be upstairs, prove it. I've already presented everything required by courthouse procedure." "No." His voice grew louder, drawing more attention from the growing crowd. "You've answered questions with riddles. You've refused to identify yourself the way everyone else does. You've delayed courthouse operations, and now an entire conference is waiting because of you." Several visitors exchanged uncertain glances. Officer Ramirez looked uncomfortable. "Sir." Derek raised a hand. "Not now." He stepped closer to Vanessa. "I don't care who told you to come here. I don't care what story you're planning to tell." He pointed toward the public entrance. "This is your last chance to leave voluntarily." Vanessa remained perfectly still. "I won't leave." "And why not?" "Because I have work to do." A short, disbelieving laugh escaped Derek. "You?" He looked around at the people watching. "Did everyone hear that?" A few nervous chuckles answered him. "The conference upstairs is for federal judges." He looked back at Vanessa. "Not for people who wander in claiming they belong." Vanessa's expression never changed. "I never claimed anything. You implied enough." He took another step forward. "I'm done playing games." Without warning, Derek reached for the radio attached to his shoulder. "Dispatch." His voice echoed sharply through the silent lobby. "This is Officer Collins at Checkpoint 1. The reply came immediately. "Go ahead. I need 2 additional officers at the main entrance." Officer Ramirez turned toward him in surprise. "Sir, that's not necessary. I'll decide what's necessary." He kept speaking into the radio. "We have an uncooperative individual refusing lawful instructions." Vanessa finally spoke. "I have complied with every instruction you've given. You've refused to leave. I've refused to abandon my responsibilities." Those words only hardened Derek's resolve. Within moments, 2 uniformed courthouse officers emerged from a nearby hallway. Officer Sandra Mitchell, Officer Brian Keller. They approached briskly before slowing as they reached the checkpoint. Sandra looked from Derek to Vanessa. "What happened?" Derek answered before anyone else could speak. "Possible unauthorized access to restricted judicial areas." Sandra studied Vanessa. She expected agitation. Instead, she found remarkable composure. Vanessa stood with both hands visible, her briefcase resting at her side. "No anger, no raised voice, no resistance." Sandra quietly asked, "Ma'am, have you refused security procedures?" "No." "Have you threatened anyone?" "No." "Have you attempted to force your way upstairs?" "No." Derek interrupted. "That's not the point." Sandra looked at him. "Then what is?" "The point is, she doesn't belong here." Vanessa answered calmly. "Officer, may I ask you a question?" Sandra nodded. "If someone arrives at this courthouse dressed differently than you expected." Vanessa paused. "Does that become evidence?" Sandra hesitated. "No." "If someone speaks calmly instead of loudly?" "No." "If someone remains respectful while being questioned?" Sandra slowly shook her head. "No." Vanessa smiled gently. "Then perhaps appearances shouldn't replace procedure." Officer Brian Keller glanced toward Ramirez. Neither officer said anything. The atmosphere had shifted. For the first time, Derek noticed he no longer had unquestioned support. He became defensive. "You think I'm profiling people?" "No," Vanessa answered. "I think you're allowing certainty to replace curiosity." The sentence landed harder than an accusation. Derek's jaw tightened. "I've protected this courthouse for 9 years. I'm sure you've protected many people. And I'll keep protecting them. I hope you do." Her calm agreement somehow sounded more unsettling than disagreement. Across the lobby, Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes watched through the glass doors. Beside her stood Chief Judge Robert Whitmore. He had quietly come downstairs after learning the conference remained delayed. He observed the checkpoint without saying a word. Eleanor whispered, "Should we stop this?" Whitmore looked toward Vanessa. She had not glanced in his direction once. She remained completely focused on the officers before her. "No," he answered quietly. "Judge Brooks has almost finished." At that exact moment, The indicator above the private judicial elevator illuminated once again. A soft electronic chime echoed through the marble lobby. Every head turned instinctively. The display showed only one word. Arriving. Derek noticed it. Officer Ramirez noticed it. Sandra Mitchell slowly looked toward the elevator. Brian Keller instinctively straightened his uniform. Even the attorneys waiting nearby stopped whispering. Vanessa did not move. She simply adjusted the handle of her weathered briefcase. The elevator mechanism hummed softly behind the polished brass doors. A heartbeat later, the locking mechanism clicked. The doors began to slide open. The brass doors slid open with a quiet mechanical whisper. Every conversation in the lobby stopped. Officer Derek Collins instinctively turned toward the elevator, expecting another group of courthouse staff. Instead, 12 black-robed federal judges stepped into the lobby in perfect silence. Chief Judge Robert Whitmore emerged first. Beside him walked Judge Linda Alvarez, Judge Harold Emerson, Judge Cynthia Lawson, Judge Michael Reeves, and 7 other senior judges from federal courts across the country. Every attorney standing in the lobby immediately straightened. Court employees lowered their voices. Several visitors instinctively stepped aside. Officer Derek Collins snapped to attention. "Good morning, Your Honors." None of them answered. Not a single judge looked at him. Instead, all 12 continued walking in the same direction, toward Vanessa Brooks. The distance between them closed slowly. 5 steps. 4. 3. Derek frowned. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at the approaching judges. His confident expression began to crack. Chief Judge Whitmore stopped directly in front of Vanessa. For one long second, the entire lobby held its breath. Then Whitmore smiled warmly. "Good morning, Judge Brooks." Vanessa returned the smile. "Good morning, Chief Judge." One by one, the remaining judges greeted her. "Good morning, Judge Brooks. It's wonderful to see you again. We've been waiting for you. Safe trip from Chicago?" Each greeting landed like another blow against Derek's certainty. The attorneys who had laughed earlier stared in disbelief. Michael Lawson quietly closed his eyes. He had suspected the truth. Even he had underestimated it. Officer Ramirez's shoulders dropped. He suddenly understood every calm answer Vanessa had given throughout the morning. Sandra Mitchell lowered her gaze. Brian Keller took one silent step backward. Only Derek remained frozen. Chief Judge Whitmore noticed the scattered papers still lying near the inspection table. He looked toward Vanessa. "Have we interrupted something?" Vanessa glanced at the loose documents before answering. Only a very thorough security inspection. There was no sarcasm in her voice, only calm honesty. Whitmore slowly turned toward Derek. "Were these Judge Brooks's papers?" Derek opened his mouth. No words came. Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes finally stepped forward from the administrative corridor. She carried a small velvet case in both hands. Stopping beside Vanessa, she opened it carefully. Inside rested a distinguished judicial medallion bearing the seal of the Federal Judicial Conference. Eleanor addressed the gathering. "Your Honors, by authority of the Administrative Office and the Conference of Chief Judges, I formally welcome Judge Vanessa Elaine Brooks as chair of the National Judicial Ethics Review Council." A ripple of astonishment swept through the lobby. Several attorneys exchanged stunned looks. One reporter quietly lowered his camera, realizing he was witnessing something entirely unexpected. Eleanor continued, "Judge Brooks has spent the past year conducting confidential evaluations of courthouse operations throughout the federal system." She carefully placed the medallion around Vanessa's neck. "This morning's observation concludes the final phase of that nationwide review." Derek's face lost all color. He looked at Vanessa as though seeing her for the first time. "The evaluation." His voice barely escaped. Vanessa nodded gently. "Yes, you were. I arrived exactly as scheduled." Derek looked toward Chief Clerk Hayes, then toward the 12 judges. Finally, back to the worn briefcase still resting on the inspection table. Every assumption he had made since sunrise collapsed in an instant. Chief Judge Whitmore spoke quietly. "Officer Collins." "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you know why Judge Brooks visits courthouses without announcing herself?" Derek swallowed. "No, sir. Because courtesy shown only to important people isn't courtesy." Whitmore's voice remained calm. "It's performance." No one in the lobby moved. No one spoke. The words settled over the marble floor with crushing weight. Vanessa walked to the inspection table. She carefully gathered the final loose page from the floor. She straightened its corner, closed her briefcase, then turned toward Derek. "You performed your duty with confidence." Her words surprised everyone. But confidence without humility becomes assumption. Derek lowered his eyes. "I made a mistake." Vanessa answered gently, "No." She paused. "You made several decisions." The distinction struck even harder. One mistake could happen in seconds. Several decisions required repeated choices. She looked briefly around the lobby, at the attorneys, the officers, the visitors, then back to Derek. Every opportunity gave you another chance to ask one more question. She continued calmly. Every opportunity gave you another chance to treat a stranger with dignity. Silence filled the courthouse. No one could dispute a single word. Chief Judge Whitmore looked toward the security cameras mounted high above the entrance, then toward Chief Clerk Hayes. I believe Judge Brooks now has everything she needs. Vanessa gave a small nod. Almost. She looked once more at Derek Collins. There is only one thing I haven't seen yet. Derek slowly lifted his head. What is that? Vanessa held his gaze. How someone responds. She paused. After finally seeing the truth, the lobby remained perfectly silent. No one knew what Derek would say next. And no one realized that the most important judgment of the morning had not yet been made. No one spoke. The silence that followed Judge Vanessa Brooks's final question seemed heavier than anything that had happened that morning. Officer Derek Collins slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time in nearly a decade wearing the courthouse badge, he felt completely certain of only one thing. He had been wrong. Not because he had stopped someone for security screening, but because he had stopped seeing the person standing in front of him the moment he believed he already knew who she was. Chief Judge Robert Whitmore looked toward Chief Clerk Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor. She immediately stepped forward carrying a slim electronic tablet. The evaluation file is ready, Your Honor. She handed it to Vanessa. Vanessa did not open it immediately. Instead, she looked at Derek. Officer Collins, do you know what this conference is about? He swallowed. I assumed it was the annual judicial ethics meeting. It is. She nodded. But this year's focus isn't courtroom procedure. She paused. It's public trust. Several judges exchanged quiet glances. Every attorney in the lobby listened intently. Vanessa continued. For the past 14 months, a confidential review team has visited federal courthouses across the country. She held up the worn notebook Derek had searched through only minutes earlier. This notebook contains observations from 38 courthouses. She slowly opened it. Not legal opinions, not disciplinary recommendations, just observations. She read aloud. Security officer greeted every visitor before requesting identification. Another page. Court clerk escorted a confused elderly man instead of pointing down the hallway. Another. Deputy apologized after discovering an administrative misunderstanding. She closed the notebook. Small moments. She looked around the lobby, but public trust is built through small moments. Derek stared at the notebook. He suddenly remembered flipping through those pages with casual indifference. He had never imagined they represented over a year's work. Chief Judge Whitmore addressed the gathering. Every courthouse participating in this review received identical instructions. No employee was informed of the evaluation date. No supervisor knew the evaluator's arrival time. No advance notice was given. He turned toward Vanessa. Judge Brooks volunteered to conduct the final inspection herself. Vanessa smiled slightly. I wanted to experience exactly what an ordinary citizen experiences. A reporter near the entrance quietly switched on a voice recorder. Another attorney instinctively took notes. This was no longer merely an embarrassing misunderstanding. It had become a lesson every person in the building would remember. Vanessa finally opened the electronic evaluation file. The first page displayed the courthouse's overall assessment. She looked at it briefly before closing it again. I won't discuss confidential ratings today. Derek looked surprised. You're not releasing the report? Not here, she answered calmly. Public embarrassment has never been my objective. His shoulders fell slightly. For a brief moment, relief crossed his face. It disappeared just as quickly when Vanessa continued. But accountability is. She walked toward one of the security cameras mounted above the entrance. This courthouse records every interaction at the primary checkpoint. Chief Clerk Hayes nodded. The footage has already been preserved. Vanessa looked back at Derek. I don't need witnesses to tell me what happened. I watched it. You lived it. And the cameras recorded it. No one challenged her. There was nothing to dispute. Every word spoken, every folder dropped, every unnecessary delay, every assumption. Everything had been preserved exactly as it occurred. Officer Ramirez finally stepped forward. Your Honor. Vanessa turned toward him. I'd like to say something. You may. Ramirez took a slow breath. I was standing beside Officer Collins. He looked briefly toward Derek before continuing. I questioned some of the decisions being made. His voice grew quieter. But I never stepped in. He lowered his head. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. Vanessa regarded him thoughtfully. And now? I realized silence can become permission. Several judges nodded almost imperceptibly. Vanessa answered gently. That realization matters. She turned toward the gathering of attorneys and courthouse employees. Professional ethics rarely fail all at once. They fail one quiet decision at a time. The words settled over everyone present. Michael Lawson remembered seeing Vanessa's name on the folder. He had almost spoken, then stopped. Sandra Mitchell remembered arriving after Derek requested backup. She had sensed something was wrong, yet she had allowed his certainty to shape her own judgment. Even Brian Keller found himself replaying the encounter from the beginning. How many chances had they all been given to slow down? To ask another question? To listen? Chief Judge Whitmore broke the silence. Officer Collins. Yes, Your Honor. If Judge Brooks had introduced herself immediately, Derek answered quietly. This never would have happened. Whitmore nodded once. Exactly. He let the words linger, which means the problem wasn't her identity. It was the standard used before anyone knew it. Derek closed his eyes briefly. He finally understood. This had never been a test of security procedures. It had been a test of character. Vanessa stepped closer. Only a few feet separated them now. When you first saw me, she asked softly, what was the first thing you noticed? Your clothes. The second? The briefcase. And after that? Derek hesitated. I stopped looking. Vanessa nodded. That's the most important answer you've given today. She extended her hand not to shake his, but to receive her identification wallet. Derek looked down at it in his trembling hands. He had been holding it for nearly an hour. Carefully, almost reverently, he placed it back into her palm. I'm sorry, Judge Brooks. I don't expect forgiveness because you apologized. She slipped the identification into her pocket. I expect change because you finally understand. Chief Judge Whitmore looked toward Eleanor Hayes. The conference can begin. Eleanor smiled. I believe everyone has already attended the first session. Several judges allowed themselves a quiet laugh. The tension that had gripped the lobby for nearly an hour finally began to ease. But Derek Collins remained standing exactly where he was. Watching Vanessa walk toward the private judicial elevator with the 12 judges surrounding her not as someone who had won an argument, but as someone whose quiet dignity had revealed the truth long before anyone else was willing to see it. As the elevator doors slowly opened once more, Vanessa turned back one final time. There will be a formal review. She spoke without anger. And every fact will be considered fairly. She gave Derek one last steady look. The same fairness every person deserves before they're judged. The doors closed. The elevator began its ascent. Only then did Derek realize the lesson that would remain with him far longer than any disciplinary decision ever could. The conference room overlooked the Capitol, but no one commented on the view. Every judge seated around the long mahogany table knew the morning had already become the most important lesson of the entire conference. Judge Vanessa Brooks stood at the head of the room, the weathered notebook resting beside her. She did not begin with statistics. She did not begin with policy. Instead, she placed her old gray briefcase on the table. This, she said quietly, was the first thing many people noticed this morning. Several judges smiled knowingly. She touched the faded sleeve of her jacket, and this became the second. The room remained silent. Very few people asked the only question that mattered. She looked around the table. How may I help you? No one disagreed. Chief Judge Robert Whitmore nodded. I believe we've all learned more from 1 hour in the lobby than from 100 pages of policy. A few judges quietly agreed. Vanessa opened her notebook. For 14 months, I visited 38 federal courthouses. I met hundreds of employees. I saw extraordinary kindness. I also witnessed moments where assumptions quietly replaced fairness. She paused. The strongest institutions are not the ones that never make mistakes. They are the ones willing to confront them honestly. The conference continued for another 2 hours. Recommendations were adopted unanimously. Every federal courthouse participating in the judicial ethics program would introduce new training focused on impartial public service, respectful communication, and unconscious bias awareness. Security officers would receive additional instruction emphasizing that professionalism begins before identification is requested. Courthouse employees would participate in annual scenario-based ethics reviews. The reforms were practical, but Vanessa knew procedures alone could never change character. Character changed only when people chose to learn. That afternoon, Officer Derek Collins sat alone inside an administrative conference room. His badge rested on the table. Across from him sat representatives from judicial administration, courthouse leadership, and human resources. No voices were raised. No accusations were shouted. The preserved security footage played from beginning to end. No one interrupted it. Every unnecessary assumption, every dismissive remark, every opportunity to ask another question, every chance to show simple courtesy. When the recording ended, The room remained silent. The director of courthouse security finally spoke. "No one questions your years of service, Officer Collins, but this position requires more than vigilance. It requires judgment." Derek nodded slowly. "I understand." The director continued. "Effective immediately, you're being removed from frontline public contact pending completion of a formal disciplinary review and mandatory professional ethics training." Derek did not argue. For the first time in years, he believed the decision was fair. "I accept that." Several weeks later, the courthouse lobby looked different. Not because the marble had changed, not because new security equipment had been installed. The difference was found in the people. Visitors were greeted before they were questioned. Elderly guests received assistance carrying documents. Confused first-time visitors were escorted instead of being pointed toward distant hallways. Every employee completed the new ethics program personally introduced by Judge Brooks's committee. Officer Ramirez had been promoted to lead training officer. His first lesson to every new recruit began with the same sentence: "Never decide who someone is before you've decided to treat them with dignity." Those words became part of the courthouse culture, not because they were written in a manual, because everyone remembered the morning that proved why they mattered. Nearly 3 months after the conference, Vanessa returned quietly to the same courthouse. Just as before, she wore simple clothes. The same worn briefcase rested in her hand. No advance notice had been given. As she approached the security checkpoint, a young officer smiled warmly. "Good morning, ma'am." "Welcome. May I help you?" Vanessa handed over her identification. The officer examined it politely. "Thank you, Judge Brooks. We're honored to have you back." There was no excitement, no panic, no special treatment beyond ordinary professionalism. Exactly as it should be. Vanessa smiled. This is how trust begins. Before entering the elevator, she glanced once toward the lobby entrance. Officer Derek Collins was there, not wearing a badge. He had requested permission to attend the ethics training as a civilian volunteer while awaiting the final outcome of his employment review. Their eyes met. He walked over slowly. "I don't expect you to forget what happened." Vanessa shook her head gently. "I won't. I wanted to thank you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For refusing to humiliate me when you had every opportunity." Vanessa answered softly. "Humiliation rarely teaches. Understanding does." Derek nodded. "I spent years believing experience meant I couldn't be wrong. And now?" He looked around the courthouse. "Now I know the most dangerous assumption is believing you've already seen enough." Vanessa extended her hand. This time, Derek shook it. Not because the past had disappeared, but because accountability had opened the door to change. She entered the elevator as the doors slowly closed. Outside, the courthouse welcomed another line of visitors. Some wore expensive suits. Others carried worn folders. Some looked confident. Others looked afraid. Inside that building, none of those things would determine how they were treated. Because one ordinary morning had forever changed the meaning of justice for everyone who worked there. Sometimes the greatest authority is never announced. It is revealed only by the quiet dignity with which someone chooses to treat another human being. True justice begins long before a verdict is announced. It begins with the choice to treat every person with dignity before knowing their title, wealth, or influence. If this story reminded you that character matters more than appearances, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where integrity always finds its voice.